And thank you so much for being here. We want to dive into the topic of self-advocacy in the workplace through disclosure of chronic illness and disability. But before we kick off, I always love to ask, how are you? And where are you talking to us from today?
I'm doing well. I've had a busy few weeks, but busy is good. And I'm calling in from Atlanta, Georgia.
Nice. I'm in Atlanta too, so that's really good to
Oh,
know.
I don't think we established that before.
No, no, we didn't. But good to know. I love meeting other people who are in Atlanta. So really excited to kick off this conversation. Want to start off by asking you to share with us your own experience contracting Lyme disease. And then I'd love to hear how that experience made you realize that people with chronic illnesses or disabilities need resources to self-advocate and self-advocate in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was diagnosed with Lyme disease in college. If you're not familiar with Lyme, I was bit by a tick. I don't actually know when I contracted the disease, but it took me a very long time to come to a diagnosis. And at that point, I was living with various symptoms involving my memory, my ability to move my arms, different things. And right after my college graduation, I actually had a PICC line placed in my arm, which is essentially a permanent IV. And I was hooked up to IV antibiotics for about 8 hours a day. As you can imagine, that's hard to balance with anything in life, but especially with a full-time job. And I saw that firsthand when I entered the workforce. And, going through the job search process, I really struggled with talking about my illness at work. I didn't know how to communicate this to my hiring manager. I didn't feel like I was someone who qualified as having a disability. I didn't know my rights, and I did not know how to advocate for myself and speak up for myself. And so, unfortunately, I ended up in a work environment that really was not inclusive. And I felt forced to choose between my health and the work that I was actually really passionate about. And this was a really defeating time for me, but I knew I wasn't alone. I started to dig into different online communities and in person as well, and saw just the depth of chronic illness and disability in the United States, and how my story just really was not unique. And so that prompted us to start our first business, Chronically Capable, which, if you've been to any of these events before, we've spoken on that company as well. And now that business has led us to our second company as well, Disclo. So have been in this space for a while now. And we build products that support people like me. And I like to say, I think I have the best job ever, at least to me, because I get to bite back at this disease every single day. So yeah, that's a bit about how I got here.
I think you have the best job ever too. And I really appreciate your job. But I heard you mention in your journey that there was a bunch of tension with disclosing. And so I would love for you to share with this audience, for anyone who is wondering right now, what are the benefits and risks of disclosing a disability or a chronic illness at work?
Yeah, so as someone who's been through disclosure myself and been through it more than once, I understand how daunting this process can feel. Despite the fact that right now over 60% of adults here in the United States live with a chronic health condition, and 1 billion people globally live with a disability. Right now, here in the US, we're seeing only about 3 to 4% of people disclosing. So if you haven't disclosed or fear this, you're not alone. And that's not surprising that so few people have disclosed. I think, due to the antiquated nature of disability disclosure, it's often a really scary process for people where they have to disclose directly to a manager or an HR team in order to get access to accommodations at work. And from our research, we've identified that historically workers haven't wanted to disclose. And that's primarily due to a lack of trust, lack of knowledge. That being said, how to disclose and why this would help me. And then also fear that disclosing will harm my career. Many people just simply don't trust their HR department to keep things private, or they fear that nothing will get done if they do disclose. For others, the act of disclosure can feel like it could be harmful to one's career, or maybe a shameful act. And then also, just to add to that, I think many people like myself don't actually consider illnesses that affect work to be a disability, quote unquote. And so for me, in my case, I didn't know that Lyme disease in that case could have qualified for disability under the ADA. And so I think a good segue here would be to talk about the benefits, because I think online, a lot of articles and conversations around disclosure tend to portray and talk about the negatives, but there are so many benefits of disclosing. And so I think, all of this is my own opinion, but, and I will say, as a disclaimer, I may say this a few times, but I'm not an attorney, but I will say some things about your rights. So just want to disclaim that I'm not an attorney, but it is your legal right to disclose at any point in your employment process, whether that be during your interview, once you're hired, or even months or years into your position. But you should never feel forced into doing so. I think disclosure is a very personal decision, and you really have to come to that decision on your own. But the main reason that you would disclose is to get access to accommodations. Accommodations are often called productivity enhancers because they really enable us to complete our job at the optimal level. A second benefit or reason to disclose is to receive benefits or privileges of employment, which could include things like access to training or transportation, cafeterias, social function, these types of things. And then disclosing can also help describe certain behaviors. And so, for example, as someone who also has ADHD, I've been pretty open about that with my team, because sometimes I'll change the subject multiple times during a meeting, and being open about that and being able to disclose that really helps to kind of set the tone and explain why I'm constantly bouncing all over the place. And then lastly, and I think most importantly, it can be quite draining to hide a significant part of your identity at work each day. And when people feel comfortable really bringing their whole self to work, their entire sense of well-being really starts to improve. And so I think we're working on shifting this narrative from disclosure being a dirty act or something that's harmful, and it can be an empowering one. So again, these are my personal opinions, but I do think that there are so many benefits to disclosing.
I had to take note of all of that in a separate document for myself. I was like, these are great points that I did not know. I kept this statistic in my head. You said only 3 to 4% disclose. That's a very small number. And I would love to know, I don't know if you know, where are those 3 to 4%? Are they in places that are super secure? Do you think there are states or particular jurisdictions that are safer for people to disclose? Or is it completely random as of now?
I think what's really interesting, and I'm sure we'll get deeper into this, but there's not a standard process, right? I think every company takes a different approach. I'd say the companies that are seeing higher rates of disclosure do have identified a process and also communicated said process to their employees. And they've encouraged ongoing conversation around this, where it doesn't just stop at my interview. It's something that's encouraged throughout the employee's employment journey. And so I think that's when we start to see more disclosure rates. And then I'd say also in companies where people and leadership is disclosing and being open and vocal, that's where we start to build a culture where if we have an inclusive and accessible workplace that's promoting things like access to accommodations, it's really helping people feel more comfortable to disclose themselves.
So pretty safe to say access alongside representation matters. So you touched on like policies, and I think that's very interesting. I spent years on the Hill, and in so many places, passing laws and enacting policies seem to be the solution to everything. But sometimes there's a bunch of different loopholes in order to sort of protect certain things and certain people. And someone just made a comment about being a comment that their higher up made after they disclosed, that then led to them not getting a promotion and then led to them getting laid off, which was a reflection of a lack of protection. So in the United States, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, which prohibits discrimination based on disability. It makes it, easier for Americans to disclose at work and ask for accommodations. But we do have a little bit of an international audience, and how we would love to know how they can find out about disability rights in their jurisdictions. And are there any international organizations or places that you know of that provide support in different places?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'm speaking often to the Americans with Disabilities Act because I'm well versed in that. The UN has a great resource on this, which hopefully I can get in the chat somehow to you all. But I'd say that the laws are really different from country by country. It's very nuanced. While the ADA is seen as definitely a gold standard, there are other countries such as Germany and Japan who have even better support and legislation to support the disability community. I'd say the best bet is to start at your country's Department of Labor page or their government resource, but the UN resource that hopefully can get shared to you all is a good one. And again, I'm definitely more versed in United States, but typically these are federal laws, and so they will be available at your country's kind of government homepage. Let's call it that.
That's super helpful. We keep talking about disclosing, but I wanted to sort of push us back because I know you mentioned earlier reporting to HR or hiring manager, but just to go back to, I guess, the basics, for someone who has no idea, how do you go about disclosing a disability or a chronic illness to your employer?
So again, disclosure is a very personal decision, and you have to come to that decision on your own. I'm just going to give you some tips for how to do that. You do not have to inform an employer of your disability when you apply for a job, when you're hired, even if later on in that job you may need a reasonable accommodation. It is your right to decide when, if, and how you'd like to disclose. So I think the better question is, how do we advocate for ourselves and ask for accommodations? And I think I alluded to this before, there's not a standard process right now. And every company looks a little bit different. I'm sure we'll get into what I'm trying to do to tackle that and what my team is doing. But first off, I'd recommend keeping it simple. You don't have to mention the ADA or even use the phrase reasonable accommodation. Asking for an accommodation is really about you getting your needs met so that you're able to do the best work that you can do. Next, I'd say to try to document this and put it in writing. Although there's no legal requirements to submit requests in writing per the ADA, some employers will have their own paperwork, but you can ask your employer about that paperwork that they may have, or you could start there, or you can submit a letter from your medical provider. But I think it's really important, and people often miss this step, but to have documentation of your request, and God forbid something goes wrong and the request isn't handled properly. Lastly, I'd recommend that depending on the size of your company, talking to HR directly. I think many employees aren't comfortable with their direct supervisors knowing the specifics about their medical condition or diagnoses, which of course, I'm right there with you. I understand this. So if your company does have an HR department, it is recommended that you disclose directly to them, and you can kind of work with HR to determine who can then be aware of your condition. And I think lastly, remembering that asking for an accommodation is your legal right. You can request this at any time. And so I think that as a practical matter, though, it's better to request an accommodation before your job performance suffers or other problems occur, because employers do not have to rescind actions that occurred before they knew about your illness or disability. And worst case scenario, you don't want to get injured or make your condition or disability worse by not having access to accommodations. And so always, as a practical matter, making sure you do so before something goes bad.
Okay, I want to shift us because I want to make sure we have enough time on this to the blinking purple light in the room. Would love to hear you talk about Disclo and how it helps people disclose.
Yeah, so currently, as I've said a few times, there's not really a formal system and a method for you to disclose safely. It typically involves a conversation between an employee and HR in which you then have to verify your disability. So we created Disclo really to be a bridge between employees and employers and really guide folks through this process. And so using Disclo, employees can actually safely disclose their disability and request an accommodation. And what makes the platform super unique is that we actually verify your disability and your limitations directly with your medical provider. And we never share that information with your employer. And so your company never knows what your underlying condition is. And it's really creating a safe space where you can get access to what you need without having to divulge this very personal information to your employer. And so we just kind of launched a few months ago here and already picking up really quickly. And so I know most of you are employees or job seekers here, but if you are at a company, definitely tell your employers about it. We're trying to really flip this conversation and standardize and modernize this process so that it's accessible and easy to disclose and obviously safe, but hopefully even fun. This shouldn't be such a daunting and scary process, and we really want to make sure that we're making it safe for everyone to do.
I want to pause because there is a sense of empathy that is etched within your work, and it guides your purpose. And it increases the sense of belonging that individuals with disabilities have in the workplace. So I would love to hear you speak to the ways that empathy has supported the growth and the creation, or even just like the thinking of Disclo.
I get asked every day some of the questions that I'm being asked right now, and also by employers. I get asked these questions in turn of like, how do we respond to disclosure and accommodation requests and these things? And before all the technical things, I think, of course, I can recommend you speak to HR and you write things down and you do X, Y, Z. But if, I think empathy is so key here. We've lost that a lot in our day-to-day interactions, and we've become very structured in how we do things. But at the end of the day, if someone comes to you and discloses something that's very personal about them, before responding with anything else, respond with empathy. And I think that's something I've tried to teach, and we've tried to teach and communicate to employers. But it's so key here. Disclosure is a very personal thing. And it takes a lot for people to go through that process. I think, I've already seen a few comments coming in where folks are saying, I've had a negative experience. And so we need to teach people the importance of empathy and how far that can go. I think I've brought this up before in a past event, but I had a coworker back in my first job, the pretty negative job, named Raquel. So ironic enough. And Raquel treated me with kindness and compassion, and treated me with empathy and asked me questions. And I've always said, be like a Raquel. If your coworker or your colleague says something and needs support, just respond to that person as a human and go back to the basics. Empathy is really the basics. So yeah, hopefully that touches upon that question.
Yes, everyone, be like a Raquel. I love that. You have two quick questions. I want to get to those before we push forward. The first is asking from Jackie, is Disclo a global platform or is it US only? And Graham is asking, what is the website for Disclo?
So the website's disclo.com. So it's like disco. We're actually kind of trying to make this a verb, like it's disclo time. It's time to disclo. So it's disclo.com. And in terms of where we're based, so we're based here in the States. We do right now support North America, but we do intend to move outside of the States as well, as we develop and grow.
Thank you. I want to continue on the empathy path. I know there is in the space of advocacy, there's always this risk of fatigue, because the world can be a little bit of a tough place when you really care about something and something is the right thing. And so, I would love to know, and I know our audience would love to know, what do you do to take care of yourself in these times, and just, in great times or in sad times, in confusing times or optimistic times? How do you practice self-care?
I'm still getting better at it. And I think that's important to note. It's a work in progress. I sleep. I used to think that this girl boss era was going to be a forever thing, and we all had to work hard. And I'm really trying to adopt the work harder or work smarter, not harder mentality, which is usually not what they want to see entrepreneurs doing. But I'm trying to really take care of myself, get that full sleep, back to the basics, eat well, sleep well, move if I can. I've obviously, these two companies started because of the fact that I was sick. And I have to remember that when I get sucked into the hustle culture, that these companies exist for a reason. They exist to support people like me. And so I have to remember that when I get carried away with wanting to just work. So it's a work in progress. And I think that's okay if you're out there trying to do that too.
Love that. I love hearing how people take care of themselves. Piedmont Park has been particularly sunny lately, so
I
I love.
still have yet to go. So maybe we should go together.
Oh my gosh, of course, I would love to. I go every weekend. But so I want to fast forward us a little bit. It's let's say 2050. It's the future, and right now the vision that you have for disability rights globally, it's all come to fruition. What does that look like for you?
I think right now, the process, as mentioned, looks so different in every country and oftentimes in every company even. And my hopes are that through Disclose ambitions and also through the support of other organizations, that we can really create a standard, so that no matter where in the world you are, what company you're at, that you understand what this process is, how it works, and that you don't have to relive the anguish and the fear each time that you decide to disclose or ask for accommodations at work. But I think even deeper than this, just disability as a whole, I think there's still a huge lack of education and awareness. I always like to say that the disability community is the largest minority group in the world. Yet so many folks are still not educated on how to treat others with disabilities, being an ally, these types of things. And I think we've got a long way to go. And so my hopes and my goals are that we can start to educate others, that we can start to be active learners and not just rely on the disability community, but put in the work, keep learning. There is so much to know and appreciate about the disability community. And that takes all of us recognizing our patterns, our biases, these things, and then putting in the work. And so my hopes are that we can really start to make this something that people aren't ashamed to talk about.
Love it. Love it. Okay, we have a couple minutes left, and we got one question that I want to squeeze in there. Christine asked a very interesting question, which actually makes me want to go back to when you were talking about Disclo, because Disclo works with the company in particular and provides the product for the company that allows people to identify without, of course, disclosing who they are, putting them at risk at all. Does Disclo also provide services that consult with companies? So if companies have questions about self-identification or questions about accommodations, is that something that people can ask their company to adapt for that type of consultation?
So Disclo is, we sell to companies, and we work with companies from all sizes, 15 employees or more. And that's exactly what we're doing, is we're working on the company's behalf to track all of these metrics. But I think, to Christine's question, which seems to be around, what about the companies who are just relying on these self-ID metrics? I think the self-ID metrics are just one piece. I think it's great to know and update. And in Disclo, I think what's so unique is that you don't have to wait till that one time a year survey that goes around when we want to figure out how diverse our company is. Instead, we're tracking in real time, promoting disclosure, making this something that we know all of the time where we're at in terms of both national standards against other companies. And I think that that's really important. And then lastly, I think for the company's perspective, we're really helping companies to maintain compliance here, to not misstep. And as mentioned, we're a liaison. We're hand holding both parties, and working with a great group of companies already so far. So excited to keep going.
I love that. Okay, so we have 2 minutes left, and I have one more question that I want to ask you. If anyone has a burning question they want to pull into the chat. Imagine we have someone who is currently listening to us, who is hearing us all for the first time. They had no idea, and they need a place to start. Who would you recommend who would you recommend they go to, and what would you recommend that they do? Start.
I believe you said who would they go to and where would they start? Sorry.
No, we got cut off on the recording. So if someone's listening to us for the very first time and hearing everything that we just talked about, and now they want to get involved, whether that is advocacy or some type of activism near them, who would you recommend people go to? Do you think people should start with organizations? I don't know if there's a particular organization in the U.S. in particular that you would recommend as we close out.
Yeah, I'd say in terms of questions around accommodations, a great resource here in the United States is the Job Accommodation Network. That's offered as a free service based off of the U.S. Department of Labor. Definitely a great place to learn and educate yourselves. Disclo has tons of resources on disclosure, both for employers and employees. And if you're looking for community, there's so many great communities out there. I'd say we've got the chronically capable community, diverse ability, mighty well. There's so many great resources out there. Go find folks, connect with others, know that you're not alone. And, the more we start talking about this, the better. So I think, we're all in this together, and the work doesn't stop here after this session.
Well, Hannah, thank you so much. It was so nice meeting you. We got to get out to Piedmont Park. I appreciate all the work that you do, and thank you for teaching us and helping us learn where we can hop in on our end.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your summit and day.
Thank you so much, ladies. That was absolutely wonderful. I'm so happy I got to sit in on this. Great questions from our audience members. And thank you both for taking the time out of your day to be here with us and help us, kind of clear up what can be a really murky subject for a lot of people. So thank you so much for that. All right, as we get our speakers, moved off the stage and get ready to onboard our next set of guests, I just want to say hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for our Diversity Reboot 2022 Virtual Summit Series. Now we have our August theme for our summit is destigmatized. We're talking about visible and invisible disabilities and neurodivergence. So I hope that you all are just as excited as I am to continue these great conversations. But as we go back, as we go and kind of get ready to dive into these new questions or new topics, I just want to highlight for everyone that these events are all about participation. They're all about our community members, and we want to make sure that you all have the ability to participate as much as you would like to. So to that end, you are welcome to put questions or comments into that group chat. It's going to be to the right of the video screen in front of you. If you have any kind of tech issues, you're more than welcome to tag in myself or San Maya. We'd love to help you out in any way we can. If you are, if you're somebody that is hoping to be active in that chat, I am going to direct you to the code of conduct that San Maya is sharing in the chat thread right now. It's just there to ensure that, like all of our virtual events, this is a positive experience for everyone involved, and that while connecting with our community members, networking with speakers, we lead from a place of kindness and respect. If you have any other further questions about it, like I said, refer to the code of conduct that San Maya is sharing in the chat right now. If you are looking to earn SHRM credits from today's sessions, you are going to want to refer to the code that's at the top of the slide in front of you. If you're not part of the Society of Human Resource Managers, don't worry about it. You get to kick back and enjoy our upcoming session. I'm very excited to introduce our next speakers. First up, we have Tanya Barber, who's the Director of Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at United Health Group, or UHG. Tanya has 20 plus years of experience in human capital across healthcare sectors, including medical devices, biotech, health insurance, and healthcare administration. Throughout her career, she continues to engage in developing career exploration programs designed to recruit diverse talent and advance behaviors that embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion at all levels and abilities. So welcome to the stage, Tanya. Tanya is going to be joined in conversation by Richard Louie, who's an anchor and journalist for NBC News and MSNBC. Richard is also an author and a veteran, as well as an award-winning journalist with more than 30 years in television, film, technology, and business. Currently at MSNBC and previously seen with CNN Worldwide, he is the first Asian American man to anchor a daily national cable news program. Also has won a Team Emmy as well as a Peabody. He's the author of the best-selling and award-winning book, Enough About Me, The Unexpected Power of Selflessness, which was distributed or published by HarperCollins and Zondervan. In addition, Richard's 15-year business career involves a fintech patent and launching 6 tech brands over 3 business cycles. Richard has lived, worked, and volunteered on every continent. And if you'd like to learn more, you can find out more about him at richardlouis.com. I'll be sharing links for all of those in the chat thread in just a moment. For now, though, I cannot wait to hear this conversation. So Tanya and Richard, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Take it away.
Meg, thank you so much. Tanya, how are you?
Great. How are you today?
Very, very good. We got a topic that is so important, one that's not often brought up, but I'm so glad that you and I get to discuss this: disability inclusion and talent acquisition, as we gather today for Diversity Reboot Destigmatized. And I guess, one of the things, just in terms of language, help me, and being a journalist, I'm always interested in that part. When we think of the very topic, when we think about how to include this into what we are, the way it's included in job descriptions. So there's the, when you're listing, and then there's how do you describe who you are that fits that job description. Why don't we start with that? The job description. When it comes to hiring, how do you fit that in? What's the best way of doing that?
Great question. I think there's 2 answers to that, right? There's the overall bottom paragraph, right? We talk about that's overall, like, diversity is important to us, please apply. Those are going to be on most of your majority of your job description, and they're pretty standard. And then one thing we do is to make sure that the overall job description is inclusive. So we work with our hiring leaders to make sure that we're sticking to the qualifications and the requirement for the role. So a lot of times you'll see job descriptions written and they'll have a lot of extras, prefers, or, they don't talk about what it does to complete that job, but more of what they want from a soft skills. And so we really work on really truly bringing in the essence of the job and what is needed, no matter what your ability is outside of that job description.
And then when it comes to the flip side, the way you put that last paragraph in, what is the best way to, when you're looking at applicants and resumes and LinkedIn's, what's the best way to fit that request of the bottom paragraph that you're talking about?
So we have 2 that we use. One is that is directly to the job, right? So we have candidates must be able to perform essential job functions with or without reasonable accommodations. So that's one thing right there that candidates should be looking at, is that if that organization is going to offer accommodations. And then we have a broader statement where we currently have, I believe it says, diversity creates a healthier atmosphere. And that's for all diversity, right? Like, we welcome diversity within our organization. So I think those are really key things to include if you're responsible for writing that job description or within talent acquisition, that you're covering and making sure that people feel inclusive when they're applying for positions at your organization.
And let's take a step back for a second, Tanya, and let me ask you, what's been your experience over the years in this space, in talent acquisition and DEIB, relevant to what we're talking about today?
Well, I've sat in both sides within DEI and then within talent acquisition, and I've really seen the transition to be more inclusive. And so I have a invisible disability myself, and when I have to apply for this, it's really hard for me to talk about. I don't really talk about it, and so I look for that in an organization, and so I feel now more than I did even 5 years ago that I'm more open of disclosing my disability than I have in the past. So I have seen an increase in awareness and openness to say, hey, we're here to help you and accommodate, because a lot of people that don't need to disclose their disability to have a job don't disclose it. And I highly recommend you do, if you have that comfortability, so you can have a comfortable work environment.
Share what you feel most comfortable with. Of course, you're Tanya, but how have you navigated putting on your applicant side hat for a moment? How have you navigated what you do express about your disability? And also, how do you decide how much depending on what the response might be at the right time, right?
At the right time. And I think that ties back into the whole talent acquisition process. So that experience you have from the beginning. I know some organizations use video interviewing and people may not feel comfortable on video. And if there's a link there that they can reach out to say, hey, are you able to make accommodations for me where I don't need to record a video or I can talk to someone live? Those are key things. So I think even having that comfortability from day one,
Yeah.
and then being open with that recruiter from the beginning, because you also don't want to get yourself into a situation where you do, have a job, right? And then you're not able to get those accommodations. So really upfront about what your needs are. I know for our organization, we really, I would say, partner with our vocational rehab services across the nation. And we use them as consultants. They help our talent acquisition with wording, advise us on trending, and so we can be more open and flexible on that. And I found when I'm open from the very beginning, my experience has been better because they know what to do and how to accommodate with that.
I would think that there might be some concern, though. You're saying that the more open you are early in the process, you know where I'm sitting, right? I'm thinking, boy, but can you give them too much? That because there's all these stereotypes and assumptions around the entire space, right?
And I think that we need to be advocates for ourselves. So I think part of that is education or not feeling comfortable having those conversations.
Yeah.
And so if we can lead that from our side of the desk, that I think that's really important. From me sitting in a DEI space now, I understand that a lot of people who don't have a disability or haven't worked in that environment may be uncomfortable with those conversations or asking for that. So one thing we've done in our organization is that we have office hours available. These are for hiring leaders. These are for our talent acquisition professionals to go in each week and talk to our accommodations team. So they have someone in the process or they have an employee that they're onboarding that they can get those questions asked that they may not be comfortable with. So we're really trying from an organization to open up that door and have that comfortability.
Oh, such good stuff. One of the questions I want to ask is, being a POC, is what are the similarities and dissimilarities, compare and contrast? Because you just talked about those who are not living with a disability or don't believe they are, don't understand the language and the way to approach it. Are there any parallels or anything differences that you can help us through when we think about the way we talk about communities of color or POCs?
I think so. I think there's a great parallel to that. And same thing, just the understanding, using your community resources, research. If you have the opportunity within your organization to bring in additional resources, if you don't have them internally, just to talk about this is key. And I think we have really elevated all, right, from a diversity perspective of being able to talk about this more openly. And so there's parallels there and best practices on moving forward, especially within the recruiting and talent acquisition space.
And the reason why I bring that up is, if going to the talent acquisition side of the equation, right? If an individual is not as well educated and steeped in understanding the disability community, can they draw from what they may know or learn from communities of color and candidates who are people of color, and trying to help them get to over that bridge? Do you know what I mean?
Yes. And I think that bridge is sometimes with our unconscious biases, right? Because sometimes if you don't know, you avoid. And so we've really worked on really providing resources for our employees on unconscious biases
Yes.
and looking at that from across all areas, right, of diversity, and then really inclusion. So I think we talk about these unconscious biases, but sometimes we miss that inclusion part. So we want to attract that diversity into our organizations. But when we get in there, what is our inclusion? So one thing we do for our hiring leaders, as well as we have an inclusive hiring guidelines and training that we provide to make sure that that is across the board for all of our diversity hires.
I've been following military families for the last 6 years and looking at disabilities, both seen and unseen. And I don't necessarily know the language around it, but I know the people. From a talent acquisition professional side, give me a tip about how to understand disabilities, both seen and unseen. What's the way to think about it?
Wow, that's a really good question. You know what? I think just being open, it's hard, but I think even in our recruiting for talent acquisition, we need to look for those qualities in those hires. And going back to even your experience with military, we actually have a military fellowship program here. And we focus on military with disabilities. And what it is transition. And so we work with our hiring leaders to understand how some of those skills translate into civilian skills, because again, it's unknown. Yes. And they may not know that. And so right. we have a team here. I actually have my colleague, would be great to have on the call with me, but he focuses specifically on that, really working with our internal leaders to say, hey, this is some transferable skills. They may need additional support. And so we have mentor groups. So we bring them in as a fellow instead of putting them into a full-time job and doing that transition really quickly. So we do a fellowship program where they have some mentorship. They're able to transition those skills. We walk them through, and depending on what type of position it is, they could go from anywhere from a 10-week to a 12-month program in that transitional, and then we'd hire them onto a full-time role. So those are some things we're doing internally. We also have a disability internship program, very similar to the military, but more open to any disabilities. We again partner with our local vocational services to identify candidates for that program. And it's called the internship program, but it's really for people who may be re-entering the workforce, who are maybe transitioning work because of their disability. They may have to do some type of other work. So they were at the vocational learning additional skills. And so we actually have that as well. And again, doing those transferable skills is really helpful. So, and I know every organization doesn't have those resources available to them, but hopefully this will give them some ideas of maybe what they could do in addition to what they're doing now.
What would be, from your both personal experience and professional experience, the ways to think about physical disabilities and mental/emotional disabilities? Give us some thoughts around both of those buckets.
I think for the physical disabilities, so most organizations are set up for that because we can make those accommodations if they need a desk or to move from, one thing we do have is we have prioritized flexible work schedules. So with that, we have flex on location, or if you're on-site, remote, hybrid. And so that accommodates both of those, but I think more from the physical side, where someone wasn't able to come in to do to the office, they can do that. We just did a push on really on the mental health side of disabilities. I had an intern, and this is public information, so I'm not sharing anything proprietary, sure. But if you do go to the United Healthcare LinkedIn, you will see a video, and I'm in there with my intern who has PTSD. And how we made accommodations for her, and we actually worked with her to really feel comfortable in a full-time work setting, and then was able to hire into a full-time translator role. And so again, I think it's really that education, understanding that you're able to find and be able to work with any type of place. So we just need to find the right location and the right person.
Yeah, because the stereotypes and the misunderstandings about when it comes to mental and emotional disabilities is that it is all one side, like you're completely incapacitated 100% of the time. And it's like a 0 or 100%, right? And that's true of many in our disability community, that's the view, and that we have so much education culturally in seeing a video. Strangely enough, as simple as that is, it's a story, it's people, right? That you were in, Tanya, along with your intern, trying to show that we all live in very intersectional ways. And this is just one part of it. God, if you don't mind, I'm going to dig into some of these questions because they're coming in. Is that all right, Tanya? We'll just take them as we go, and I'll also ask you some questions in between.
Sure, great.
All right. Raquel says, has your disability ever caused you a problem in your position? And how did you address that?
It did, and I know Raquel, and she knows my disability. So I actually had lost my voice, and I don't have a vocal cord. And so I wasn't able to speak. Mm-hmm. And I speak now all the time and in my roll call for that. And it was very difficult to make that transition. And I had to look for a role that I was able to accommodate that until I was able to rehab. And even now I have a role where I need to take breaks and not able to speak a lot. Mm. And so I feel that it was hard to disclose that because I felt like I wasn't going to be accepted as a candidate for a role because I needed to take breaks during the day for my voice. I may not be able to speak at some points, in time. But I wanted to work for an organization and for a leader who was accepting of that. So I had to be out of my comfort zone to share that information to make sure that I was getting the accommodations that I needed. And that was really hard. So anybody out there listening, that was an easy task. I'm willing to work with someone who needs to do that, who needs to do a transition or put talking points together to disclose accommodations that are needed. Thank
you for sharing that, Tanya. I want to go to TND MBAND. And this kind of harkens back to our earlier questions. What responsibility falls on the organization for educating employees and managers instead of looking to those with disabilities to be the ones spearheading the education initiative? And I was just thinking that because often, when I'm talking about stuff related to AEPIs, I have to be like the expert on it, which I'm not. And I think ND is saying the very same thing. What is the responsibility of an organization to educate employees and their forward or outward facing folks to understand the space versus the person living with a disability being the individual that has to, be the perfect spokesperson on it?
Right, because I can see that's a lot to take on, to be the spokesperson for all disabilities, because I'm not that, right? So I again think it's a joint responsibility. I feel that everybody's unique in their role in this, and their accommodations needed, and their disability, and we all have stories. So I think telling your story also educates everybody. Mm-hmm. But then on the other side, the organizations also need to take that approach, like we talked about before, offering training, being open, seem like, hey, we're able to make accommodations for you. So I think it's a combination of both.
And a part of that, what Steph is asking here is, how do you get candidates like yourself comfortable? You're just kind of describing that, where you can say, I would like to consider the discussion about accommodations, but let's go straight to it. What is the way that talent acquisition departments and activities can be more understanding to make it comfortable for a person living with a disability to enter into the conversation?
Richard, I think that's a great question. And I'm just speaking in general here, but I think we're still learning that. I think we've come a long way, but I still think we have a long way to go. And again, it puts it back into that person with a disabilities lab to be educated on that. are educating everyone else on that. And so I feel that organizations are trying to do better and to be better, and that you want to work for someplace that's doing that. And so even doing a little bit of research on what they have out there, like we talked about at the beginning, on what do they do, what do they have on their job descriptions? Do they even have anything on their job descriptions about, accommodations or diversity or everyone's welcome here? I think those are key areas to start, and organizations need to start there, as well as just being out there and saying, hey, we want to talk to you.
I'm no expert here, Tanya, but I would say live it, breathe it, as an organization. Is it in your,
Yes.
do I see it when I look at what you do? Are
Yes.
are the people held up high representing that space, right? Are they part of the conversations that we're having in every corner? And sometimes you'll look at Marcom stuff and you'll go, well, like it says this, but I'm not seeing that, right? Picture's
Yeah.
worth 1,000 words. I mean, these
It
are
is.
baby steps, right, Tanya? These are baby steps.
Yes. And you're exactly right. And like I said, with even the video out with us sharing our story with my intern is a big step in the right direction that I think we need to do more of, and we need to
Yeah,
see more of.
exactly. And it's not like we use the word normalization or mainstreaming. We have to be careful. I'm not saying that.
Mhm.
That's not the words I'm using. I'm talking about let's see them as part of the team, right? Okay, that's a whole
Yes.
different session here with Power to Fly, which we'll have on another time. Tune in. No, I'm joking. So give me a sentence or a word that, as a talent acquisition professional, what I might be able to use to be more accommodating, to enter into that conversation in a comfortable way with a person living with with a candidate living with a disability.
I think the language that we use during that process, and some things that we've been able to do for coaching wise, is that we recommend that the recruiters ask, is there anything additional that we need to do to make you successful in this role? Leaving that open to whatever they want to share. And then even at the next step, say you do get hired and you're having that initial conversation with your hiring leader, we ask the hiring leaders to ask, like, in addition to, say, technology or computer, or, here's what I have for you, is there anything else that you need to be successful in this role? And so we're trying to have that open conversation to give them that opportunity to share what they need, what they want or need.
One more bite at this apple. Is there a question in a job description or a word in a job description that you like to use to show that you are thinking of those candidates living with a disability?
That's a good question. I think there's multiple words. I would say, if we're using, focused right on these skills and the skills that are required for the job, I think that's a key thing. And as we talked about before, is that, reasonable accommodations, diversity is welcome here, like seeing those type of things and them sticking to a very, focused on the skills job is really helpful, where they give you the summary of their overall team,
Yeah.
maybe the overall project, and then here's the basic skills we need to do this job.
Yeah.
I think that's key.
I mean, could you even go as far as, and we're down to 2 minutes, could you even go as far as saying, we would absolutely like to, paraphrasing, we would encourage a discussion if you are a candidate living with a disability? Would you actually say something like that? I mean, that's a little non-job description-y stuff, but
it is. And I have not seen that yet, but I would welcome that if I had my own company, not speaking for anybody else, but yes, I think that, diverse in thought and experiences is key.
Yeah.
To making it, the world successful. So yes.
All right. Then on the flip side, because when you put that in a job description, then your folks that are outward facing, they better be ready, and
Yes.
they better be tuned up, as you might say. In the minute we got left, how do we get tuned up if we're a talent professional and we're trying to be ready for that conversation?
I think the first thing is listening. So make sure you're listening and not making assumptions. So they may say have a disability, and you want to listen to what that is, what those accommodations are, ask key questions. That's the key. Have those conversations. Most companies have an accommodations team. Bring it to the accommodations team the information you have gathered, so you can make an overall, good recommendation on what's needed instead of making assumptions or not say anything at all because you don't feel comfortable.
And you can also go to Power to Fly to get more updates and information about how to address this topic if you are a talent professional. And Tanya, thank you so much. I look forward to us being able to hang out again and dig more into this topic. And I really appreciate you sharing your personal journey along the way here with us, because I know that none of us have the right to that, but you gave us some of that. So thank you, Tanya.
Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
You too. Meg, back to you, my friend.
Thanks, Richard. All right, this is going to close us out for our second to last session today. We have another session that's going to get going here in just a moment, so I want to be quick. This is a pre-recorded session. So what's going to happen is once this session ends at 4 p.m. Eastern, this channel will close for the day. So I'm going to turn the stage over so that way we don't miss out on any part of the upcoming recording. This was a great conversation I got to have with Katerina Rivera, so you don't want to miss this, and I hope that y'all enjoy. Bye.